Title: My boss called me into his office and dropped a bombshell. The call came in the middle of the afternoon, pulling me away from my desk. I worked in the high-stakes world of luxury hospitality, managing five-star hotels across Europe. The job was demanding, but I thrived in it. My boss, Adrian Miller, wasn't just my employer. He was a friend. Over the years, we'd forged a strong bond, built on mutual respect and trust. I looked up to him as both a mentor and a leader. But when I entered his corner office that day, something was off. Adrian wasn't his usual calm, collected self. He seemed tense, his hands gripping the edges of the desk. He gestured for me to sit, his face unusually pale. "Luca," he began, his Swiss accent heavier than usual, "what I'm about to tell you, it's going to hurt. I just need you to promise me one thing." I furrowed my brow. "What's going on?" He fixed his gaze on me, his eyes dark with concern. "Promise me you won't do anything rash," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I know your temper. I know your past. You were a soldier, a fighter. But this isn't a battlefield." A cold knot formed in my stomach, dread seeping into my bones. "Just tell me," I said, the tension almost suffocating. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I consider you a brother, Luca. That's why this is so hard for me. It's about Julia." My heart skipped a beat. Julia, my wife of 6 years. I'd met her right after I'd left the military, struggling to adjust to civilian life. She had been my anchor. At least, that's what I thought. "What about hers?" I asked, my voice tight with unease. Adrian paused, then leaned forward. His tone softened, but there was an undeniable firmness to it. "She's been having an affair with my son, Eric." The word struck me like a physical blow. I froze, staring at him in shock, waiting for him to say it was some cruel joke. But his expression was grim, his eyes filled with pity. "They're on their honeymoon right now," he continued. "She left you, Luca. She didn't have the courage to tell you, so she ran off with Eric. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I had to tell you before someone else did." The world spun around me. I stumbled out of Adrian's office. My mind reeling, the world around me seemed to fade as my mind raced with endless questions. How long had this affair been going on? How had I failed to see the signs? Julia had been distant lately, but I had convinced myself it was just stress. I replayed our last conversation in my head. She talked about a work trip to the south of France, claiming she needed some space to clear her mind. Now, it was painfully clear she wasn't working. She was with Eric, toasting with champagne on a sun-drenched beach, basking in their betrayal. That night, I sat alone in our apartment, surrounded by remnants of a life that now felt like a carefully constructed lie. The urge to destroy something was overwhelming. To scream, to confront Julia and Eric, to demand an explanation. But Adrian's words echoed in my mind. "Promise me you won't do anything rash." Adrian wasn't just my boss. He had been my lifeline. He had helped me transition from the military to the corporate world when no one else would. If he was asking me to stay calm, there had to be a reason. The following day, I returned to his office, my anger barely contained. "You said you had a plan," I said, my voice low. "What is it?" Adrian nodded, his expression serious. "Revenge, but not the kind you're familiar with, Luca. This isn't about violence. This is about strategy." He laid the plan out, piece by piece. Eric, his only son, was the family's black sheep, a spoiled, entitled playboy who had sailed through life on his father's wealth and connections. Adrian loved him, but he had long since given up on the hope that Eric would ever mature or take responsibility for his actions. "This isn't just about you, Luca," Adrian explained. "It's about Eric, too. He needs to face the consequences of his choices. But I don't want to destroy him, or Julia." I clenched my jaw. "She made her choice," I said, my anger bubbling up. Adrian's eyes softened. "Choices have consequences, Luca. Trust me." You'll get your revenge. The plan was intricate, requiring patience and precision. Adrian and I would work together to shatter the illusion of paradise that Julia and Eric had built. It would take time, but that was the beauty of it. Revenge wasn't just about striking back. It was about making them feel the weight of their actions, piece by piece. The first step was financial. Adrian had always been discreet about his wealth, but his resources were vast. Using his connections, he quietly cut Eric off from the family's accounts. Without warning, Eric's credit cards were declined. His lavish honeymoon was interrupted by uncomfortable encounters with hotel staff demanding payment. Meanwhile, I began laying the groundwork. I planted seeds of doubt in Julia's mind. Using an anonymous email account, I sent her a series of messages, each one containing photos of Eric at various parties with other women. These images, gathered by Adrian over the years, were old, but Julia didn't know that. The cracks in her relationship began to show soon after their return to London. Reality hit them both hard. Eric, accustomed to a life of luxury, suddenly had to face the consequences of his actions. He struggled to find work. Adrian had ensured that. And Julia quickly realized that the fairy tale she'd imagined wasn't her new reality. But our plan didn't stop there. Using my understanding of Julia's habits, I orchestrated a series of small, yet devastating, setbacks. Her favorite boutique mysteriously lost her account details. The social circle she had carefully cultivated over the years began to distance itself, whispers of her infidelity seeping through the ranks. Through it all, I stayed in the background, watching as the life Julia had built with Eric slowly crumbled. Months of careful plotting came to a head, forcing both of them to face the lies and deceit they had woven together. By the time their relationship was on the brink of collapse, the cracks had become chasms. The breaking point arrived at a grand gala Adrian hosted at the Waldorf Astoria, a venue synonymous with prestige and luxury. Eric, desperate to regain some ground after losing his financial support and social status, saw the gala as his chance to curry favor with his father's influential connections. Julia, determined to maintain the appearance of a perfect life, wore an expensive gown she had purchased on credit. I attended the event at Adrian's invitation, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. I wasn't there for petty satisfaction. This wasn't about gloating. It was about watching the empire of lies and betrayal they had built come crashing down. As the evening wore on, Eric grew increasingly agitated. Guests whispered about his fall from grace. Too much scandal surrounded him to be ignored. When a well-known journalist approached him with pointed questions about his financial mismanagement, Eric's composure began to crumble. Julia, sensing the rising tension, tried to intervene, but her efforts only fueled his fury. "I don't need your help, Julia," Eric snapped, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "You're part of the reason I'm in this mess." Julia's face turned bright red with humiliation, but Eric wasn't finished. "You think you're some trophy wife, don't you? Living off me. Pretending to be..." Eric's outburst was met with Adrian's calm yet firm intervention. As ever, Adrian was the tactful host. He placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder and guided him to a quieter part of the room. I followed at a distance, curious to see how this would unfold. "You've embarrassed yourself enough tonight," Adrian said, his voice even but unyielding. "It's time to face reality, Eric. You've spent your entire life running from responsibility, blaming others for your failures. But that ends now." Eric's eyes flashed with frustration. "You don't get it, Dad. I was trying to make my own way," he argued, his voice rising. "And you use people." Adrian cut him off. "You use Luca, you use Julia, and now you're paying the price." The conversation ended abruptly, with Eric storming out of the room, leaving behind a buzz of whispers and suppressed laughter. Julia followed soon after, her head held high, though the mask of composure she wore was starting to crack with each step. In the weeks that followed the gala, the consequences of Eric and Julia's actions became impossible to ignore. Eric moved into a modest, rundown flat, far removed from the luxury he had once enjoyed. With his reputation in ruins and no one willing to hire him, he was forced to face the full extent of his choices. True to his word, Adrian refused to bail him out. Julia, on the other hand, faced her own reckoning. Without Eric to sustain her lavish lifestyle, she was forced to find work for the first time in years. Her attempts to re-enter the high society she once thrived in were met with cold indifference. Her public infidelity and humiliation had turned her into a social outcast. One day, Julia reached out to me. Her voice, when it came, was hesitant, almost pleading. "Luca, can we talk? Please." I need to explain. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, the silence thick with unspoken tension. Julia seemed different, humbled, perhaps even broken. "I made a mistake," she began, her voice trembling. "I thought I wanted more. I thought Eric could give me the life I deserved, but now I see how wrong I was." I listened silently as she spoke of her regrets, telling me how the fantasy she had built for herself had crumbled into a harsh and unforgiving reality. She apologized, her tears falling freely, but there was no sense of satisfaction in seeing her pain. Instead, I felt something different, a sense of closure. "Julia," I said finally, my voice steady, "I don't hate you, but I've moved on, and you should too. We can't undo the past, but we can learn from it." She nodded, wiping her tears away. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something more genuine in her eyes, a glimmer of realization in her eyes. There was something different. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away from me. Life had forced her to change, just as it had pushed me to grow stronger. Looking back on everything that had transpired, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led me here. Betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge had once consumed me, but now they felt like distant chapters in a story I had long since moved past. My career thrived, and I discovered joy in the simple things. Quiet evenings at home, the sound of friends laughing, the satisfaction of a job well done. I even met someone new, a kind, intelligent woman named Sophia. She understood the importance of trust and loyalty, and our relationship was built on mutual respect. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Adrian and I remained close, our bond deepened by the trials we had faced together. As for Eric, though still distant from his father, he eventually found his own path. He took a job at a small tech startup, learning the value of hard work and humility. Julia, too, found her footing again. She began working as a consultant, rebuilding her life on her own terms. One evening, as I watched the sunset from the terrace of my new home, I realized how far I had come. The man I once was, consumed by anger and grief, was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Life will test you in ways you never expect, breaking you down to your core. But the true measure of strength isn't in seeking revenge. It lies in rising above, reclaiming your worth, and building a life so extraordinary that those who wronged you can only watch from the sidelines. Forgiveness isn't a weakness. It's the ultimate victory. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If you found this story meaningful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Lauren's Story. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories haven't subscribed yet. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.